Good morning, everybody. I'm Josh, and I'm super excited to show you the Blue Team Level 2 launch presentation. We have so much stuff to go through in this quick video. We're going to be covering things such as the lessons, the labs, talking about the exam, talking about the discounts we're running, the people behind the course. So there's a lot to get through. So we're going to jump straight in. The first thing we're going to be looking at is the Academic Advisory Board and the writers. So these are the industry professionals and experts that have contributed directly to the BTL2 training course and our labs. Second, we are going to look at the course content. We are going to jump into the live course. We're going to check out a few lessons so you can see how they are structured. Third, we are going to take a look at the brand new lab platform and talk about how activities are handled differently in BTL2. We're also going to discuss the practical exam and we'll jump into a lab as well and show you what that looks like. And then finally, we're going to talk about the pricing, some of the launch rewards that we're offering, and how you can bundle level 1 and level 2 together to save even more money. So let's jump in here. So for those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Joshua. I'm the founder and lead trainer here at Security Blue Team. I have a degree in cybersecurity management. I've spent about 2 years working in a SOC for a global SATCOM company, and I have just started as a CISA analyst working for an e-commerce company as well. Now down at the bottom, we've got a lot of shiny certifications. These are here to kind of just show how passionate I am about training. I love doing training. I love creating training. It's just something I really enjoy. I love learning new things constantly, as I'm sure many of us do in the security industry. And I think, having these here does kind of back up the skills, the knowledge I possess. And it just helps to show that, I know what I'm teaching. So next, let's take a look at the other people behind the course. So these are our academic advisors and our technical writers. So the top 4, Sean, Matt, Andrew, and Jay, are academic advisory board members, along with Ishmael on the bottom left. And then our writers are myself, Andrew, Venkatesh, and Sebastian. Now, these guys all have a wealth of experience in cybersecurity, a huge range of backgrounds and companies. Really exciting to bring all of those skills into one place. So just a couple of examples. Jay is a principal security analyst at CrowdStrike. Sebastian did 7 years in the UK RAF, and he's now just joined the Spider Labs team at Trustwave. And Ishmael has a absolutely crazy 15 years in DFIR and malware analysis. He is an incredibly smart guy, and all of our knowledge, all of our experience has all come together into BTL2. So the course domains, this is a little bit different than how we did level 1. Level 1, obviously we had 5 domains, but as level 2 is more advanced, it's more technical, we've cut that down to 4 just so it's not overwhelming because of the amount of detail we go into in these 4 domains. So what we cover in this course is vulnerability management, malware analysis, threat hunting, and advanced SIEM. So 4, pretty different domains, but they do kind of intertwine quite nicely if you do work in security operations or incident response. So they are a good mix, but the scope is really wide. Okay, so just to give you guys an idea of what the timeline is looking like from today, obviously BTL2 is launching imminently. That's why you guys are here watching this video. And then what we have planned for the next 1 to 2 months is what we call a continuous development cycle. So what we tend to see when we release these courses, we've done our internal reviews, our internal feedback, but students, just having more eyes on the training material really does highlight some, potential issues or weak areas to us. And then using feedback from our students, we can actually improve the course for everybody. So what we're going to do for the first 2 months specifically is have a really heavy focus on taking feedback, implementing it as soon as we can to build up the course so that it provides the most benefit for everybody. So this could be things like maybe students identify that there's a lesson we could add, or there's a tool that's not covered which would be good within the scope of BTL2. Things like that. If we get that feedback and we agree with it, we are going to implement that there and then. So it is really important. If you do take BTL2 and you have any feedback, send it to us. We want to hear it. We want to improve the course. So please send us your feedback. Obviously, this process is going to continue on even after this first 2-month period, but this will kind of be the intense period where we're trying to get stuff out quickly so that anybody that buys the course, in the very early days, they're still going to have months and months of training time with the new content, so they don't get overwhelmed with anything that we do add. Now, 90 days after launch, this is when the certification exam is going to be released. So even if you buy training today on launch, when the exam comes out, you're still going to have 2 months of training access. So it is completely up to you when you want to take your exam. You could, if you feel like you're ready, you can take it straight away. You can wait until your 5 months is up. You can do it just before. So that is when the exam will release, and students can start to take it whenever they feel ready. And then finally, either next year or even 2023, we are looking to release Blue Team Level 3. Now, this is going to be our expert, God tier technical defender. We're going to have 3 really, really exciting domains. At the moment, we know that one of them is going to be cyber deception and entrapment. So, how can we trick adversaries into showing themselves? How can we gather intelligence on them that's actionable? Another domain we are thinking about doing, but we haven't confirmed yet, is end user behavioral analytics for insider threat detection. Now, that's probably the longest domain name we're ever going to have for one of our courses. But that is just a really exciting, cutting edge topic, combining things like UBA with DFIR, investigating insider threats. So that's going to be really, really cool. And then the third domain, we honestly have not decided yet. So unfortunately, I cannot disclose that, but it's going to be cool. Really, really can't wait to start working on that. So, one big question that I'm sure quite a few people are going to be thinking is, how have we learned from BTL1, and how have we offered a better experience for students in level 2, especially considering the higher price point? So how have we made it more valuable for you as a student so that it's worth the investment in your career? So there's quite a few points here. So for example, this is kind of similar to BTL1, but our courses always have a very large scope. So with level 1, right, we've got 5 domains. We probably could have sold these as 5 different courses, but we enjoy putting a lot of content into one course, so it's more valuable for you. So for example, with level 2, you're getting 4 completely different domains. Each one of these could be their own courses, but we've packed that all into one easy to consume bundle for your benefit. We have 170 plus lessons in BTL2. That is a lot of content covering these 4 domains. Now, we also have 17 knowledge tests. So if you've done BTL1, you'll know what these are. But essentially, these are kind of just quick reviews to recap on the content you've learned in that previous lesson, in that previous section, sorry. So you do a section that's maybe got 5 or 6 lessons, and then you'd come to a knowledge test. And that's going to have a number of different question styles, things like single choice, multiple choice, sorting, fill in the blank, free answer. And these are just used to ensure that you've really taken in what we've just covered. And these are really, really useful for knowledge retention. So we have 17 of those in the course at the moment. We also have 30 plus in-browser labs, so absolutely no setup required, no more virtual machines, no more installing tools yourself, no more troubleshooting dependency issues. You just click go and it's all in your browser waiting for you. You just connect in, all the files are there ready for you. You do what you need to do in that lab, you answer the questions, you mark it as complete, and then you're one step closer to being prepared for the BTL2 exam. We also have a new student forum. So we did have one for BTL1, but unfortunately we didn't really have the capacity to actively monitor that as closely as we wanted. So often it was just myself going in and helping students when I had some spare time, which at the moment, there really isn't much of that. But one difference we're making for BTL2 is that we're going to be providing dedicated student support. So I'm actually hiring in people that are going to act as student support ambassadors, and they are going to be helping students when they get stuck, when they have a question, when they don't understand something. They're going to help triage feedback so we can get it pumped back into the course. So the students are going to be able to get dedicated support through the new forum. Now, a good thing about a forum is that when somebody creates a post with a question, we answer it, we close it, it's going to stay in that forum. So people can search for their issues and find answers really quickly without having to wait for me or my team to get back to you. So over time, this forum is going to become a huge, huge knowledge base for BTL2, and it's going to be a really, really useful resource for students. We also have guides to set up local labs. Obviously, all of our activities are handled in cloud labs, but we did want to offer this to people that could benefit from it. So, for example, if you're going through the malware analysis domain and you're really enjoying it, you want to carry on practicing at home, you've done our labs, you want to do more, then we have a step-by-step guide of how to set up Flare VM on a Windows box. So you can just carry on practicing with the tools we've covered or different tools, trying it on your own samples. So we have those labs for the malware analysis domain, the threat hunting domain, and the SIEM domain. So you can get set up at home with your own labs, and it means either during the course or after your access expires, you can carry on learning with us. One other change we've made is that BTL1 had 4 months of access, BTL2 has 5 months. Now, we estimate that the time to go through the course is going to be roughly the same because you have the BTL1 with the 5 domains and the 300 lessons, which are, fairly simple to get through. But then in BTL2, we have the 170 plus lessons, but they are harder to get through and they are longer lessons. So we think it will take about the same amount of time. We've given that extra 1 month of on-demand access to make it more flexible for our students, just because some things in this course are pretty intense. It's not that easy to just sit through and hammer it all very, very quickly. So again, we're just providing that flexibility for students. You can take your exam whenever you want, but at least this way you're going to get a full 5 months of training if you need to. Same with level 1, we're also offering 2 free exam attempts with BTL2. So if you fail your first attempt, it's not a problem. You're going to get feedback on your strengths and your weaknesses, and then you're going to be able to start the exam again when you are ready. So this means, if you have bad luck or you just can't remember something, you're really, really struggling, you don't need to worry and stress out because you will be able to take the exam again. And then finally, physical rewards. So again, we're following on with BTL1. We're going to continue to offer physical rewards. So things like your certificate, your presentation folder, most importantly, your metal challenge coin. So we are doing BTL2 exam coins. So if you pass with any score, you're going to get a silver coin. But if you pass with 90% or above on your first attempt, you are going to get a gold coin. Now, we do actually have another special challenge coin that is available for the first 100 orders, but we will cover that towards the end of the presentation. Let's take a look at what's up next. Okay, perfect. So now we are going to jump into the course. I'm going to show you some of the content at a high level. We're going to jump into a few lessons and show you what they look like. And then hopefully by the end of this, you will have a good understanding of what is inside of BTL2. So let's head over to the course. We can see here, this is a very similar layout to BTL1. We are currently planning a migration of all of our training content to a new website, but at the moment, this is what it will look like. So we go down here to the course content table. We're going to see a first introductionary section, Welcome to BTL2. This is going to cover some pretty basic things like recapping the terms and conditions. We're going to talk about what the course covers. We're going to provide credits and special mentions to anybody that's contributed to the course. And then we're going to have a feedback form here for any issues and feedback so it can come straight to me and my team and we can get that fixed straight away. We've also got a lesson here on how to access the new lab and forum platform. Obviously, at the moment, this is a separate site. So just a few quick steps of how to get registered there so you have access to your labs, the forum, and also the store. And then one other thing, which is kind of student-centric, is this idea of having study resources. So we have a lesson here called Creating a Study Plan, where we're going to help students get set up, how to build a study plan, how to kind of structure your approach to BTL2, factoring things like work or social commitments, personal time. We're just going to talk about how we can manage that, the different tools we can use, just to ensure that you can make the most out of your time studying BTL2 so you can get through the course quickly and you can pass your exam. So the first domain is vulnerability management. We're going to start off by setting the scene, talking about things like why vulnerability management is important. We're going to talk about concepts such as business risk. We're going to discuss vulnerabilities, CVE identifiers, and CVSS scores. And then in here, we have the tools that are covered in this domain. So we're using OpenVAS, WPScan, Nmap, Nmap scripting engine, Wapalizer, POF, Nikto, Snort, and pfSense. So a good range of tools in here. And lots of fun to play with. So the second section here is host discovery. We know we want to start vulnerability scanning our assets, but how do we actually know what we have out there? So we talk about things such as the sys controls we can see here, 1 and 2 being your hardware inventory and your software inventory. Really, really important, not just for vulnerability management, but especially useful for us. Now we talk about how we can feed into a kind of asset inventory system when we do our scanning. If we pick up hosts that aren't already in there, we can actually send this over to the IT team so they can add that in. And we can also pull information out of these. So for example, we can pull out host names or IP addresses to help build up target lists before we start our vulnerability scanning. After that, we go into some more kind of active approaches to identifying hosts on our network. So using things like Nmap and Zenmap, using OpenVAST host discovery scans, and just how we can map out what hosts are out there, how we can fingerprint them for things like services and versions and also operating systems. And then we end by covering passive host discovery, so how we can just listen on the network and identify hosts that way using POF. In the third section here, we actually talk about vulnerability discovery. So how can we actually track down vulnerabilities using a scanner? So we talk about how scanners work. Obviously, we know we click scan and we get all these lovely vulnerabilities come back, but how does that actually work under the hood? What is going on? We talk about scanning considerations. So things such as maybe the scanner isn't whitelisted to get access into a certain network, so it can't identify hosts in there or scan them. Things like network congestion, network scans versus agent scans, and a few other things in there as well. Again, we talk about passive vulnerability discovery, so kind of similar to the passive host discovery, how we can just listen on the network and identify vulnerable systems that way. And then we go into what we call remote to local scanning. So this is where we use scanners situated in the cloud, and we are going to scan our company's public IP space. Now this gives us a really good perspective of what an attacker would see if they were on the internet trying to scan us themselves. So things like remote services that are present on the internet, websites, web servers, all juicy things that we really want to know about, because a vulnerability in one of these devices could let them breach the perimeter. Next up, we have specialist scanning. So using Nikto to assess web servers, what Nikto does, what it does well, how to use it. And then we're going to have a lab here where you're going to jump in and you're going to start using Nikto to do a scan. Then we have WordPress. So again, the same kind of thing. We're going to talk about why WP Scan is used, how popular WordPress still is today. We're going to talk about themes, plugins, and users. And then you're going to have a chance to jump into a lab and assess a WordPress site using this tool. And then finally, the main bulk of this section really is using OpenVAS for internal vulnerability scans. So this is including both credentialed and non-credentialed, so you can see the difference in the results we get from each of those. And you're going to be tracking down some vulnerabilities within systems that are on our private network. And then you're going to jump into a lab and do that for yourself. And then finally, a lab that we're adding in is a black box vulnerability assessment. This is where we plan to build kind of a medium scale lab where you're going to be able to jump in. We're going to have a number of hosts and you can just play around assessing them with different tools and triaging the results. So VM4, we are going to talk about prioritization. So we've got this list of vulnerabilities. Cool. How do we know what we actually need to fix? What stuff do we care about and what stuff don't we care about? We only have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of resources. So we really need to prioritize the things that are riskiest to the business. So we're going to be taking a risk-based approach to vulnerability management, and we're going to consider key factors such as threat intelligence and exploitation activity. So is this vulnerability being exploited across the internet? And if it is, who is exploiting it? Are these threat actors that we've done threat modeling internally and we've identified that these threat actors are likely to target us? If so, there's going to be some kind of increased likelihood, and we need to prepare for that. And then another factor we're going to talk about is asset value. So how different systems and different businesses and how they're structured and how their business systems operate is going to affect how valuable that system is to an organization, and therefore the prioritization of remediation. So just one really quick example is a database that holds absolutely tons of PII versus Bob's laptop. If they were both vulnerable, which one would you want to remediate first? Well, probably the database holding PII, but there's a lot of different factors that come into that. It's all about context. So we cover that in that lesson. And then we have an activity here where you're going to be able to download some scan results and you're going to try and work to prioritize them based on the information provided to you. And then finally, for vulnerability management, we are talking about reporting and remediation. So reporting, how can we get across the work that we've done? Whether that is to a technical audience, such as remediation stakeholders, so your IT team, your infrastructure team, your network team, how do we tell them that we need stuff to get fixed? And then we go on to non-technical, so things like your exec board. How do we get across to them in business terms that the work we are doing is worth the investment? So you can use things like metrics, um, just different things we can put into visualization and just get across what we're doing in a really, really easy to consume way. So things like the total count of vulnerability occurrences, mitigated patch rates, the OS version level counts, lots of different things we can use to show at a glance the work we are doing is benefiting the business. And then we go into mitigation. So we know we have these vulnerabilities, we prioritize them, we know what needs to be fixed, but how do they actually get fixed? So we talk about things like patching, so using things like WSUS and SCCM and third-party solutions. We talk about configuration changes, because sometimes the vulnerability will be in a specific component. Maybe we don't even need that component to be enabled. And if we can turn that off, the vulnerability is gone. And then other things like risk acceptance. So, if the cost to fix it is going to be more than the damages of an attack, then the business probably isn't going to try and fix it because it's going to cost them more money, and it doesn't make any sense from a business perspective. We also talk about other things, kind of enhanced monitoring. If maybe we can't accept the risk, we can't fix it, but we really want to know if an attacker exploits that vulnerability and they are using that system in some kind of way. So things like your SIEM logging, your EDR, your AV, your IDS, your IPS, how we can use that to make sure that we know the second something happens on that box. Now, the second domain, we are jumping into malware analysis. In the first section here, we are going to talk about why malware analysis is important and why we should be doing it in-house. We're going to discuss the different types of malware. We're going to talk about the approaches to malware analysis, so static, dynamic, and hybrid. And then we're going to show you the tools we are covering in this domain. So we cover a lot of stuff in this domain. Things like sysinternals, specifically auto runs, TCP view, and soon to be Process Explorer. We have a wide range of tools for analyzing PDFs, docx's, XEs, DLLs. So things like PE Studio, Resource Hacker, Lazy Office Analyzer, PDF tools by Didier Stevens. So things like PDF ID, PDF Parser, PEPDF as well. So a good range of tools in here. We also cover some online services such as VirusTotal, Hybrid Analysis, Joe Sandbox, and we kind of discuss when we should and when we shouldn't be using online public sandboxes. So lots and lots of cool tools in here. Now, this is one of the 3 sections I talked about earlier where we have step-by-step guides if you want to set up your own lab at home. This is optional. Obviously, some people might not be able to do this even if they want to. Some people might just not be interested. Maybe they already have labs or they just want to use the course material. So this is here if you want to. If you don't want to go through it, you can just click through the lessons, mark them as complete, and carry on. So, MA3 static malware analysis. In here, we're going to provide a quick overview of what static analysis is and how and what information we can retrieve from samples using this approach. We're going to introduce assembly language and just talk about what it is. The same for how portable executable files are actually structured. And then we're going to go into some very basic concepts that are still really, really crucial, such as hashing and strings. Then we're going to have a lab where you're going to jump in, you're going to get the hash values from some samples using things like Hashcalc or PowerShell or Linux CLI. And you're also going to start pulling out strings using things like bin text or just a strings command. And you're going to see if you can find any interesting artifacts this early on in your investigation. Next, we're going to cover Yara and Yargen because we can use Yargen to generate Yara rules, and it's going to pull out, ASCII strings, hex strings, things that are going to be really useful to us, and how we're going to kind of use that information, and how things like Yara rules can be used for EDR solutions as well as a detection method. Then we're going to cover packers, so what packers are, what happens to a file when it's packed, how can we detect a packer, how can we unpack it, and then we're going to do things like going back and running strings on it after we've unpacked it so you can see the difference between a packed and an unpacked file. Then we're going to have a lesson on analyzing portable executable files. So this is actually using things like PE Studio and Resource Hacker. How do we actually do that triage of a .exe file? Then we have a lab for that, so you can just jump straight in and start practicing. Here we're going to introduce disassemblers and debuggers. We do not cover it in the course at this time. We do introduce what it is, how they're used, and we also do provide extra reading material if students really are interested in that. We kind of give them some places that they can go and pivot off and get some information themselves. Then we jump back to analysis, and we are going to be looking at PDF files. So like I said earlier, using tools like PDF ID, PDF dumper, PDF parser, PPDF, and just how we use those, how we identify different objects inside a PDF, things like JavaScript or embedded files or open actions, and how we can actually pull that out and work out what is going on with this sample. Then we have a lab for that as well. And then finally, we are looking at doc and docx files, what they are, how they are abused, and how we can analyze them. And then we have a lab for that as well. Now, finally, as I mentioned before, we have a lot of section reviews in the course. So just as an example here, this one is for the static analysis section. So we have questions in here, such as where can we find JavaScript embedded in the PDF? What's the magic number for executable files? What software can we use to find hash values, etc., etc. So really good to recap on the knowledge you've just gained. Moving on, we're going into the dynamic malware analysis section. So we're looking at things like what is dynamic analysis, what are the benefits, what are the cons, what kind of information we can actually retrieve by using this approach. And then we're going to introduce sys internals. So here we're using auto runs. So we would use this, when we've detonated a malware sample in a secured and monitored sandbox, then we look to jump in and see if any persistence mechanisms were deployed. Now this could be through services, scheduled tasks, editing registry run keys, things like that. We're going to show you, what to look for, how to identify it, how to collect information about it, and just to understand how malware can deploy persistence techniques and how we can find that, because it is really, really useful information to know. TCP view, we're going to talk about active network connections, so how we can identify maybe if a sample is acting as a backdoor, it's connecting out to a resource on the internet, whether that is a command and control server, whether that is trying to download a second stage payload, things like that, and how to interpret the results from TCP view. Then we have a lab where you're going to be using auto runs and TCP view to analyze a malware detonation. And then we're going to move over to process, monitor, and proctor. So you're going to be using both of these tools to understand how malware utilize processes and how to kind of follow what they're doing and analyze the activity. Then we're going into capturing network traffic. So you're going to be using Wireshark during detonation of malware samples to kind of just keep track of what network activity, if any, is occurring with that sample. So things like second stage payloads, beacons, heartbeats, how we can detect that, and how it can help us find useful indicators such as domain names, URLs, and IP addresses. Then we're going to go into Cuckoo Sandbox. So we're going to get you playing around with a cloud deployment of Cuckoo. You're going to understand what an automated sandbox is and how to use it, and just have some fun analyzing some samples. And then we're going to cover online analysis tools. So how and when to use solutions such as VirusTotal, MalwareBazaar, and hybrid analysis. So kind of how to submit your samples, how to triage the results, what kind of information we can retrieve, which of this is useful to us, and kind of just how to keep a note of everything that this malware sample is doing, and how we can kind of just offload that detonation to a third party, and how we can still get all of this useful information from it. And then finally, we're going to end this domain with some black box analysis labs. So we have one executable, one PDF, and one docx. You're going to be able to just jump in. All the tools are ready for you. You can just play around, take your time, analyze those samples, and answer a number of questions about each of them. Now, the third domain is threat hunting. We're going to start off by talking about what threat hunting is. We're going to talk about the benefits of hunting. We're going to introduce the threat hunting lifecycle. We're going to talk about how threat intelligence and the MITRE ATT&CK framework play into hunting. And then we're going to mention the tools covered in this section. So in here, We're using both ELK and HELK. We're using things like Sigma and ElastAlert. We're looking at log sources such as Sysmon, AuditD, Windows Event Logs, etc. We are currently building out a lab that is not yet ready, where we are going to try and play around with Velociraptor EDR. So just kind of get you used to writing OS queries, how we can pull information from a remote system, things like that. So we're really interested to get that out, and we'll hope you guys will like that. We'll also cover things like Yara, and then quite a few networking tools. So things like TCP dump, Wireshark, Tshark, Rita. And then for deliverables, we're going to be using Attack Navigator and Detect. So again, here we have one of these set up your own lab sections. If you are interested, you'll be configuring your own HELK instance. And we move on to endpoint threat hunting. Now in here, we have a lot of very useful artifacts for DFIR as well. Things like shim cache, prefetch, LNK files, jump lists, user accounts, network connections, services, registry keys. There is a lot of really useful information in here that isn't good for just hunting, but is also good for a lot of other things as well. So we'll jump in, we'll take a look at the user accounts lesson. We're going to start off by talking about what local user accounts are, what the default accounts are, how these can be abused, and kind of how to just detect abuse of local accounts, which could be a pivot point in your hunt, or it could lead to the start of a hunt. And then down here, we're also going to talk about Active Directory based accounts. So how does Active Directory work? How are accounts, how are they structured? How are they used? And also how domain accounts can be abused as well. So network connections, we'll take a look at this. We're going to go, we go through quite a few CMD and PowerShell queries, how we can look for things like listening ports on the local system, how we can look for processes that are listening on the network, how we look for services that are listening on the network, and how to just detect anomalous things that we know aren't normal and are worth investigating. We also talk about RDP-based artifacts, so how we can tell if a Windows system has initiated or received any RDP-based connections. So looking at things like pre-auth and auth events. So for example, here, we can find this specific event on the initiating client that is connecting to a remote client via RDP. How we can pull out things like when this was actually started, what system they're connecting to. Lots of really useful stuff, especially for things like lateral movement as well. Really, really interesting. And then finally, we end with some SSH-based artifacts. So things like OpenSSH and PuTTY artifacts that are left on a system, and how we can use that to piece together connections that have been made. So we also cover some other things as well, like services and tasks. We talk about system logging, so things like Windows event logs, Sysmon, PowerShell script block logging. We have a lab here where you're going to be deployed on an ELK. It says HELK there, but it is going to be an ELK instance. You're going to configure one or two quick things. You're going to RDP over to a Windows server. You're going to set up Sysmon. You're going to set up WinLogB, and you are going to start pushing Windows event logs to the ELK instance. And you're going to see those logs appear in the scene. Really, really good activity, just to kind of give you that fundamental understanding of how client logging works and how we can set up the data sources in our scene. And then finally, we're just going to cover the Windows registry as well, and how it can be a useful hunting ground for us. Then we go on to Linux systems. So again, we cover the same kind of things like user accounts, network connections, processes, files, cron jobs, and system logging. And then we have a few more labs here. So for example, in this one, lab 2, you are going to be passing some known attack sample Windows event logs through your Windows server that you configured earlier. You're going to be pushing that into your ELK instance, and then you are going to be playing around and doing some analysis on those samples. Lab 3 is going to be a black box Linux system hunt. So you're going to be deployed on a Linux system, and you're going to be looking for basically all of these artifacts here, just so you can understand, where they are, how to analyze them, and how to pick them out. And then the same again for a Windows system hunt here. And then we're going to jump into network threat hunting. Now this section here is focused mainly on things like C2 communication, beaconing, and exfiltration. So how we can identify those, how we can analyze that with different tools. So we're going to revisit quickly the OSI model and things like common protocols. We're going to talk about infrastructure considerations. So we know we need to tap the network, but how can we actually do this? And where do we want to do this as well to get the most information? We're going to cover packet capturing tools as well, so how that can be achieved. And then we have all of our analysis tools here. So things like TCP dump, Wireshark, T-Shark, CapTipper, and Rita, with a heavy focus on Wireshark and Rita for hunting down suspicious network activity. So for example, in the Rita lesson here, we're going to show you how to install it, which isn't really important because it's already set up in our Cloud Lab for you, but it's just there for completeness. We're going to talk about how we can transform PCAPs into Zeek logs, which is what Rita will ingest. And then finally, how to actually use the HTML version of Rita to analyze things like beacons, DNS, and long connections. And then finally, for threat hunting, we're going to talk about deliverables and post-hunt activities. So things like using detect and attack navigator, whether we are going to be mapping the data source quality, log source quality, whether we're mapping out our detection coverage so we know what we need to hunt for, what we need to build detections for, and just how these two tools can be used together to create deliverables, and also kind of information that we can use internally to our team to help us keep track of what we are doing. We also cover report writing. So based on your audience, what kind of sections do we want to include in our report? What kind of information is going to go inside of them? And then we also cover some threat hunting metrics that are useful for kind of just reporting on the activities that we've done, showing our value, showing the return on investment, and just clearly demonstrating that the work we are doing is beneficial for the organization. Now, finally, we are coming to the advanced SIEM domain. We are going to start off by introducing again what is SIEM, talking about different SIEM vendors, their strengths, their weaknesses. We're going to talk about the benefits of using a SIEM, not just for the security team, but also for things like your network and your IT teams. We're going to introduce the concept of SOAR, and then we're going to talk about how MITRE ATT&CK and SIEM can be tied together quite nicely. So things like mapping detection rules to specific attack techniques. And then the tools cover for this section, we are primarily playing with Splunk. We are also going to cover a few things for ELK. For basic low-level alerting, we're going to be using Sigma and Uncoder to quickly set up detection rules. We're going to be using the threat hunting Splunk app for things like dashboards and reports. Log sources, so things like sysmon, syslog, Windows event logs, PowerShell script block logging, etc. And then also a few more tools in there as well. So things like emulation tools like Caldera, you're going to get down and dirty, conducting adversary emulation, and a few more in there as well, which are pretty exciting. So this section here, AS2, is kind of engineering focused. It's still very high level, but it's just to kind of ensure that analysts really do know how SIEM works. Everything from how a client generates logs, how those logs are shipped to things like aggregators and collectors, and then how things like the correlation engine works, right? So we write detection rules, but how is that actually interacting with the data that we're storing? And then things like, how this data is stored on scale, and how long we actually retain this data for. And then finally, we're going to end with a quick lesson here on alerting with Sigma. So you are going to be jumping into a Splunk instance. You're going to get some Sigma alerts. You're going to transform them into the Splunk format, and then you're going to deploy those inside your instance. Again, here we have one of these optional sections. So if you do want to set up your own Splunk lab at home, you can do that. And then we jump into proactive SIEM. So while the threat hunting domain was more kind of hunting on endpoints or across the network, this section here is more focused on threat hunting from your actual SIEM. So again, we revisit the threat hunting lifecycle. We talk about the difference between proactive and reactive. So things like sitting there waiting for alerts to come in versus actually using the data you're ingesting to go and find stuff that hasn't been detected yet. We're going to talk about the threat hunting app and why it's useful for us as hunters, especially with all the dashboards and reports we get that we can use to create hypotheses. We can use them to actually hunt and perform analysis. So really, really useful app there. Then we go into searching for threats. This is kind of our catch-all lesson for just revisiting how to use Splunk, how to use a SIEM to perform analysis, how to pivot on different data sources. And then we have a lab here where you'll be doing some hunting and some analysis there just to kind of get you into the swing of things and just flying through Splunk, hunting down activity. We've got a lab here where we're going to be using Loki IOC scanner and how we're actually going to show you how using the Splunk deployment app, we can actually push scripts to remote hosts, execute them, and then pull that information back. So for example, use cases for this could be things like, DFIR scripts that are designed to pull back information, things like CAPE, um, Yara rules to look for malware, suspicious files, pull that back into the SIEM. Really, really useful tool for us as hunters, but also as analysts. Then we go on to command and control detection. So what is C2? What are the characteristics? And how we can hunt this down in our SIEM using things like visualizations and dashboards. We have a lesson on what file integrity monitoring is, so how we can look for changes to system files or company confidential files using things like OSSec. Then we have a lab for that. And then spotting the abnormal, this is where we kind of introduce things like end user behavioral analytics, things like anomalous rules, so looking for things that are out of the ordinary, so comparing activity to baselines. And we're kind of just going to introduce that, talk about what it is, and talk about why it's useful for threat hunting as well. And then we're going to end with just a quick lesson on honeypots. So, what honeypots are, things like honey admins and AD, how we can set up these quite quick and easy little traps, and then just use our SIEM to monitor for logs that show us those traps are being interacted with, and then how we can use that to kind of get alerted on an adversary if they haven't already been detected in our environment. Really, really interesting section. And then finally, the last section of the course, but probably my favorite, is where we are going to be conducting adversary emulation. So kind of, a quick introduction to purple teaming. You're going to be emulating threat actors. You're going to be pulling those logs into the SIEM, and we're going to be using that to create things like dashboards, alerts, reports, just making the most out of that data so that if we ever see that kind of activity again in the future, we are going to alert on it and we can respond as quickly as possible. So this lesson here, the threat modeling and planning, we're not going to just chuck you into the deep end and say, hey, here's Metasploit, go and smash up the network, because that is going to be a really, really bad approach. It's not going to be valuable to us, and we're not going to get a return on our investment. So we're going to talk about how we can actually plan meaningful and worthwhile emulation engagements. So there's 3 different use cases that we cover. One is testing single techniques. So, primarily for that is just to boost our detection coverage. Maybe if we're just lacking in one area, we'll go out and emulate one technique, find the logs, build a detection rule, and then we are good to go. Another use case is maybe emulating a number of techniques or threats. This could be used in a live kind of incident response tabletop with stakeholders from across the business, so not just the security team. So we could emulate things like initial access, persistence, ransomware deployment, exfiltration, and obviously all of this is us, so it's safe. It's not actually a malicious actor. But then we can use all of that information as a tabletop exercise to kind of just assess our run books, our policies, our procedures, and how well our security team works with the rest of the business. And then finally, one of the major use cases is actually just emulating all TTPs from a threat actor. So we do threat modeling, we identify APT28 is probably going to target us because of the industries that we operate in. Okay, we want to emulate all of their TTPs, make sure we can detect that, we have the visibility, and then make sure that we have the detections in place. So if this ever happens again, we can get alerted on it and respond straight away. We're going to cover the different tools we can use, so things like automated tools and frameworks like Caldera and Atomic Red Team. We also talk about kind of attack frameworks, more manual tools that can be used to emulate, especially when threat actors actually use these tools themselves. So things like Metasploit, Cobalt Strike, Empire, Covenant, we're just going to introduce all of those. Now, in the next lesson, we're actually going to show you how to use Caldera. So this is everything from actually deploying agents on hosts that we're going to simulate the activity on, to executing, malicious activity, scheduling operations, so time-based events. And then you're going to have a chance in a lab to do that all yourself, just connect into a remote host, deploy the agent, and just mess around with different attacks until you get bored, really. And then after that, we're going to talk about how we can use the data that we've actually created in that emulation engagement to build things like operational dashboards, rules, how to tune rules that maybe aren't working as efficiently as we'd like. And then we're going to have a lab where you're going to do exactly that. So that is the course covered at a pretty high level. We jumped into a few lessons. I hope you kind of have a good understanding of how it's structured, what kind of tools you'll be playing with. and what kind of labs you'll be jumping into. So if we head back to the presentation deck and we go to the next slide, it's time to take a look at the new lab platform. Now, if any of you have played on Blue Team Labs Online, you are definitely going to recognize the client in that picture. We are using a modified version of our BTL2 client because it works so well, but we're just using labs that have been built purely for BTL2. So let's jump in. Now, this is one of the main differences between BTL2 and BTL1. Obviously, if you've done level 1, you'll understand that it's, quick and, well, relatively easy. Practical activities, right? So you'll be downloading things like memory dumps, PCAPs, disk images, log files, and you can just analyze that locally on your box or in things like virtual machines. So, it's not super hard to set up. And it's just quick. You can get the files, you can keep them, so you can go back to them even after your access expires. But we wanted to move away from that for BTL2. Now, the main reason for that is that a lot of our labs are a lot more complex, and they are larger than single files to analyze. So what we've done to accommodate this change is that obviously we have made the choice to move to online labs, which just makes sense because some of the scale of these things would be a lot of setup on the student's part if you were going to configure 5 or 6 virtual machines in a network yourself. The system requirements to do that alone. So there's a lot of really good reasons why we've moved to cloud labs. So if we click on BTL2, this is the platform that you'll register to once you've purchased BTL2 on our normal website, and you can jump straight in here. Now, what you're going to see is that you're going to have 120 hours of lab time by default. Now, we've done a lot of tests for this. 120 hours is going to be a lot more than you need. This is going to be enough time to go through all of the labs, go through the new labs that are coming in the next 30, 60 days, and keep replaying them. 120 hours is a long time. Now, even if you do manage to use them all up, and some people will, because they just want to play around more or take it slow, then you can buy more hours straight from the store. You don't have to wait for us to add them for you. You just click a button and they'll be in your account straight away. And we really do not charge much at all for these lab hours because we want you to practice in these labs so that you can hit the exam and you can pass it. So if we head to the vulnerability management domain, what we can see here is the labs. So we have things like active discovery of Nmap, active discovery of OpenVAS scanning, Nikto scanning, WP scanning, and a black box large scale lab that's coming soon. And all of these, you just click start. You're going to select your data center based on where you're located in the world. You're going to request a lab, and you're just going to jump in. So what I'll do in a minute is I'll show you how one of these labs actually looks. So malware analysis, again, you'll recognize things, hashing and strings, exe analysis, PDF analysis, Office doc analysis, using sysinternals, monitoring processes, the black box labs down at the bottom here. Jump over to advanced SIEM, things like threat hunting, app deployment, analysis and hunting, adversary emulation, deploying scripts on remote hosts, creating rules and dashboards, how to detect C2 traffic, and things like file integrity monitoring that is going to be coming very, very soon within the next few days. And then finally, the threat hunting section. We are going to see labs like Winlog Beat to Elk, replaying attacks, Windows System Hunt, Linux Hunt, traffic analysis Wireshark, beacon detection with Rita, deliverable creation, and a black box hunt as well, similar to the vulnerability management one that we're building out. And like I said before, you click start, you click your region, and then you just click open client. It's going to connect us in, and you're going to be good to go and start straight away with no setup at all. Now, one main difference for those of you that do play on BTL2 is that we have an instructions panel on the client, which obviously we don't have with BTL2. So if we click on here, we're going to get information that's going to kind of guide us through what we need to do. Now, this is going to vary lab to lab. Some of these are very, very detailed, literally step by step of what you need to do. We use things like screenshots, which you can expand out. And these are just going to help you go through that. So those are more kind of for the labs that are kind of used as lessons, so kind of teaching objects. And then some labs like this is kind of like a mix between teaching and assessing. So here, we cover the steps of how to convert a PCAP into Zeek logs. But then here we kind of just let you off the rails and say, you have a number of questions, go and answer them. We don't really hold your hand through that. And then the third type of lab we have is, really the black box labs. There's no steps. We've taught you the knowledge. Now go and do it yourself. So three cool types of labs. We've got the ability in here to have things like file downloads, like I said, screenshots that you can expand out. So, if it looks really small in the client, you can just click it, go really big. You can see what commands we're typing quite easily. And then same as BTL2, you're going to be answering these questions, putting in the answers, submitting it. If you get it right, it's going to count towards your completion. You complete all the questions in the lab, and that lab is going to get marked as complete, which will look like this. Now, one thing worth mentioning is that you do not need to complete all labs to start your exam. You don't even need to go through the whole course to start your exam. You can start your exam whenever you feel ready. So that's a really big thing to remember. If you haven't finished all of the labs, when you go to start your exam, we are going to shove a pop-up box in your face that says, "Are you sure?" This is just because the labs we've created for the course, we've created them on purpose because this kind of thing is going to be in the exam. So if you do all of our labs, you're going to be really, really prepared for the exam. And that is what we want. We want you guys to pass. We want you guys to have learned stuff, to feel good. So, we really, really do recommend that all students complete all of the labs before they start their exam. Now, just a couple more things to show you on this new site before we jump back to the presentation and finish things up is things like the new forum that I mentioned. Obviously it's not going to look amazingly pretty because there's not much stuff in here at the moment because we haven't let you guys into the course yet. But this, it's just a different forum. Like I said before, we've got dedicated support. So if you get stuck, you have a question, you don't understand something, leave a post in the forum. We will get back to you. And if you see other students' posts and you kind of, you have a good answer, please help them out as well. Because if we have all students helping each other, we have my team helping everybody as well. We are all going to get our answers really quickly, and we're all going to get through the course together. And then finally, one difference between level 1 and level 2 is obviously level 1, as it stands as of today, we accept exam submissions by email. Now this is changing for level 1, and we've already implemented this for level 2. So ignore what this says here, but this is where you will start and submit your level 2 exams. So, after that 90 days has passed from today, when the certification exam releases, you'll be able to come in here, start your exam, pick your data center, so you're going to get the best speed possible for your exam lab. Download the report template so you can fill it out, and then you can submit your report in here as well. And you're going to have things like your previous attempts, your scores in here. So we didn't have that with level 1. Obviously, you'd have to just go back and check your email. But in here, you'll be able to see your score, instructor feedback, what you did well, how you could improve, and then also things like download your PDF certificate, which you're going to be able to get the second you pass. Just to kind of give you something to look at while your physical rewards are shipped. So that's the new lab platform. It's still in, we're still actively maintaining it. We've got a lot of things we're going to add in over time. Things like migrating all of our courses over, all of our certifications over. So this is a very big project, and we're sure, we're going to build out this really nice platform that's going to be all focused around you, our students. So we'll jump back into the presentation. We've got one more slide here. So pricing, the thing that everybody really wants to know about. So BTL2 normal price is going to be 1999 GBP. Now for launch for 31 days from today, we are dropping that price down to £1,500. So that is £500 off. That's 25%. That is quite a big chunk knocked off. Now, what does that actually include? You're going to get your 5 months of on-demand access to the training course. You're going to get 5 months of access to the dedicated forum, and you're going to get 5 months of access to the lab platform. You're also going to get 120 lab hours for BTL2 labs. And as I mentioned just now, the dedicated student support, and you're also going to get the 2 exam attempts and feedback. Now, one thing that's worth mentioning here is that we've separated the time for you to start your exam with your training access. So as it stands in BTL1, you have 4 months of access and you have to pass your exam in that time. Otherwise, you can either choose to leave it or purchase a course extension and take your exam in that time frame. Now with BTL2, that isn't the case. So you're going to have 5 months of training access, and after that, you can still start your exam. So you could do 5 months of training, you could take a month break, and then do your exam. So you don't have to rush and do it in that 5 months. Obviously, some people might want to do it in that 5 months, and that's completely fine. But this kind of just gives you more flexibility of when you take your exam. And one thing as well is that when you take your exam, even if you've lost your course access because it's been longer than 5 months since you purchased BTL2, when you start your exam, you're going to get access back to the course for the exam duration. Now, this just means, even if it's expired, you can jump back in, you can revisit lessons, you can top up your notes. It's still an open internet exam, so you can go back through the course. That's the whole point. In the real world, we aren't stuck in a box with no internet. We can go out, we can Google things, we can search for things. So even if your training access expires, you wait a month and you start your exam. For that exam duration, you'll be able to access the training course again for free to help you with your exam attempt. So moving on, looking at the bundle, we are going to be selling BTL1 and BTL2 together. Now this means, if you don't have BTL1, you can just quite easily do level 1. When you're ready, start taking level 2. So this is going to be a saving of £550. So as it stands today, BTL2, we recently dropped the price from 499 GBP down to 399 GBP. So this means with the extra £50 saving, you are only going to be paying £349 for BTL1. Now that is less than CompTIA Sec Plus or CISA Plus. And you're getting a training course with 300 lessons. You're going to be doing log analysis, forensic investigations, memory analysis, hard drive analysis. So much more than you would do in any of those courses, especially with the practical 24-hour incident response exam. So bringing BTL1 lower than CompTIA, the multiple choice exams and theory training is an absolute bargain. You really are not going to get BTL1 cheaper than that ever. So it is a great opportunity if you don't have level 1 to get this bundle. Take your level 1, and then as we mentioned here in the second rectangle, is that it's not going to be you buy it, you start level 1, and then 4 months later your BTL2 starts. You're going to be able to start your BTL1 and your BTL2 whenever you want. So you could buy this bundle tomorrow, and then in a month start BTL1, do 4 months, take a 2-month break, start BTL2. But you are going to be saving so much money from this. So £550, and also $763. So that is a really, really big saving if you do want to do level 1 and then level 2. And obviously with this, you're going to get your 4 months access, your 5 months access, you're going to get your BTL2 100 lab hours, you're going to get the dedicated student support as well, and you're going to get your 2 exam attempts for each certification where you will get feedback after each one. Now, if you do BTL1 and BTL2, you are going to be doing an absolutely crazy 9 security operations domains. Now, that is a lot of content. So for the price of £1,850, you are going to be doing digital forensics, incident response, SIEM, phishing analysis, threat intelligence, advanced SIEM and emulation, threat hunting, malware analysis, and vulnerability management. That is an incredible amount of content. So whether you're breaking into the industry, or you have a couple years, or you maybe even have a few years, this is an incredible choice to make sure that you are going to be a technical, hands-on, well-rounded defender. You're not going to be shooting off into one specialization. You're going to have skills from 9 different domains. Now that is going to be awesome if you are looking for jobs, you are trying to get a promotion, you just want to expand your skill set. This is the perfect opportunity for what is, a low price, considering the scope of content, the people that have contributed to it, and our practical activities, labs, and our practical assessments. So really good opportunities for the next 31 days. You can save quite a bit of money if you buy BTL2 or the BTL1 and 2 bundle now. Now, what's going to happen shortly at 4 p.m. BST today is the checkout is going to go live for both BTL2 on its own and also the bundle. So what you're going to see at 4 o'clock is you're going to see 2 buttons appear on the YBTL1 page. You're going to be able to jump in and purchase your training there. So with all that being said, I hope you guys have enjoyed this presentation. Like I said, there's a lot of content to cover. I hope we've got through it pretty well. I hope you understand of what is included in BTL2 in terms of training, student support, student resources, labs, and kind of a brief insight into the exam until we release more in the coming months. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I really hope you do choose to grab BTL2. I think it is going to be an incredible investment, and I really hope to see you in the forum, and I hope to see you when you're certified. Thank you guys for attending, and I hope to see you in BTL2 soon.